In the summer of 1855, the yellow fever epidemic had the nation working on the working class port of Norfolk and Portsmouth. Here today to tell us about all of this in a new book, Lon Wagner, who is telling the story of what it was like in a new and interesting way. Thank you so much for being here. Okay, we're talking about this. I just asked you off camera, but I want to ask you on. What made you decide to write on this topic?
I did a series for the Virginian Pilot about almost 20 years ago. And it was a long series, but even in newspapers, it wasn't long enough. And I found out about some of the characters who are just so rich. And then over that period of time, mosquitoes keep reemerging as a global problem. And so the story got richer and richer, and I got into some of the science and got more into the characters. And so I realized it was a book, not just a newspaper story.
And as you went through your journey of writing this, obviously I think a lot of people would be familiar in some way or fashion, but what were some of the things that even surprised you as you were putting this book together?
I think people around here, they know a couple of things. There's a quarantine road in the Larchmont neighborhood, and there's a memorial over on Hampton Boulevard that some Boy Scouts put up in the 90s. But they don't appreciate how big this story was at the time. This was the California wildfires or the Hurricane Katrina of the summer of 1855. The entire country was looking at us here in Norfolk and Portsmouth to see what was going on. It was covered in the New York Times and the Philadelphia newspapers and the Baltimore and Boston newspapers. And doctors came down and up the East Coast as volunteers to help because these two cities were in such horrible shape. The epidemic hit so hard that the cities could no longer maintain themselves. They couldn't provide their own medical services. They couldn't provide their own food. It was that bad.
When we are reading this book, you talked about just the connection here, obviously to Hampton Roads, but for people who are reading it, what are some things that you think even today we can take away from it if those exist as well?
Well, if you think about COVID, right? This was a big thing that we all endured. Right now in Massachusetts, they're closing public parks because of equine encephalitis. If you remember the Brazil Olympics, it's Zika virus, and all of those things are carried by the same mosquito, the same species of mosquito that did all this damage. So it's as old as it is, it's become more and more relevant down through the years.
And let me ask you just about some of the characters. Could you at least tell me about one of the interesting people that you wrote about within it and how they played that role in history and in your book?
Well, I'm going to tell you about something. You're located on Woodis Lane. And the mayor of Norfolk at the time was a guy named Hunter Woodis. And I suspect this lane is named after Hunter Woodis. He was a young mayor. He had just been elected. And he stayed in town to try to keep the town going. And he went into the most sick neighborhoods. He tried to wall off a part where people were sick himself, built a wall to like keep the sick people on that and keep everybody healthy. And so he was actually a true hero of the epidemic.
Wow. Okay, you guys have it here. Let's see the book there, The Fever by Lon Wagner. A lot of interesting things in there connected right here to Hampton Roads. Lon, thank you so much for coming in and sharing that for sure. Interesting book.
Thanks. It's been a pleasure.